Now we're going to have a wonderful panel from some state education chiefs who will talk to us a little bit about the context of some of this work in action. These state education leaders will talk about policy and practice in their own states and its connection with NAEP and NAEP results. We are very grateful to each of them for making the time to be with us today and sharing their insights. The moderator for this morning's panel is Terry Holliday, a former commissioner of the Kentucky Department of Education and a past member of the National Assessment Governing Board. Please welcome Terry.
It's great to be back with the National Assessment Governing Board, and an exciting day for state chiefs all across the nation when the NAEP results are released. As a former state chief, I can certainly verify how important this data was to advocacy groups, to our General Assembly, to our State Board of Education, to our governor when they were recruiting industries to our state. So it's very exciting to be back here today. And I'm just delighted that I don't have to worry about it, that these guys have to do the work now. With me today are some strong leaders with the state chiefs, Jillian Balo, who's superintendent in Wyoming, Thomas Brady, the director of the Department of Defense Education Activity, Glenn Price, who is the deputy chief at California Department of Education, and Pam Stewart, the commissioner of the Florida Department of Education. So the big question is, all this money, all this time, all this effort, so what do states do with this data? So the big question for you guys, and we'll just go down in alphabetical order here, state level policy and practice. Is there a connection with NAEP results? Jillian?
All right. Well, thank you, Terry, for moderating, and it's always wonderful to see and work with my colleagues from across the nation, and thanks also to NAEP. It was really interesting to accept the opportunity to be on a panel before the scores were released, when you're going, am I the consolation, or anyway, I just talking a little bit about Wyoming. Wyoming is a rural state, a large rural state, and when we think about the main driver for our success on NAEP, it boils down to adequate and equitable funding. We have a unique model, funding model in Wyoming that affords us to truly focus our time and energy on teaching and learning versus local inequities from district to district. We've also, through equitable and adequate funding, been able to create a system where every student really can take full advantage of the educational opportunities that are available to them, and also because of our funding model and the focus of funding, we've been able to target our spending, and we've really made a difference with our economically disadvantaged students and our students with disabilities in particular. So in short, how Wyoming distributes and utilizes our funds underpins our success on NAEP. Let me just quickly explain what our funding model looks like. Our local revenue, instead of being used to fund local schools, is captured by the state and combined with state revenue and then distributed equitably through a complex formula to everyone in the state. Additionally, special education is reimbursed at 100%. And also we have high teacher salaries. So again, inequities from district to district are off the table for us. Here's how that makes a difference when we look at the NAEP metric. Number one, we have relevant support and interventions that we're able to provide as a cornerstone to every initiative and action that we take in education. So the state education agency provides data retreats, root cause analysis training, PLC training, and the science of teaching training. Also, our state agency engages stakeholders in an ongoing exercise of just building buy-in. And this has really created an atmosphere of confidence in a system that includes curriculum, standards, assessments, and teaching and learning that equates to being rewarded or recognized inside of our accountability system. So finally, when we think about sustaining and we look at the data that was presented today, again, we really are closing the gap with our economically disadvantaged students and our students with disabilities in particular, and holding our own everywhere else. And so we'll seriously analyze our landscape after the NAEP scores, and we'll immediately move to procure and provide professional development and technical assistance and interventions with the focus on where we have the greatest challenges. We'll also continue to move forward with education reform, and that reform means reform of the whole system. And that's not always transformational. That's tweaking here and there. That's making sure that we are up to date on everything that's happening. And finally, Wyoming is in some what we might call some dire straits with respect to revenue, and so there's always that challenge of assuring our legislators that and our stakeholders that our investment in education and our commitment to targeted funding for all subgroups is vitally important. But that's becoming more difficult, and so we always have to be up for that challenge. So again, thank you, Terry, for giving me the opportunity to share.
Thank you. Very interesting news from a rural state out there. Thank you, Jillian. Tom, you've got a unique setup too. Tell us how you.
Thank you, Terry. I appreciate that,
and
and I want to thank the National Assessment Governing Board for the invitation. It's quite an honor to be here. For those of you who were surprised that the Department of Defense has a school system, let me take a few moments and tell you what we do. We have 168 schools around the world. We are divided into 3 regions: the Pacific, Europe, and the United States. We have schools in 11 countries, 7 states, in Guam and Puerto Rico. And we service pre-K to 12, the children of the men and women who are in the armed forces stationed around the world and the Department of Defense civilians. And it's an honor to have that mission. And we have 15,000 dedicated professionals to make sure that we provide the best educational services we can. So that's DODEA in a nutshell. We have a headquarters here in Washington, D.C., which acts as the state. So that's where the SEA functions, policies, distribution of resources, et cetera, that's conducted here in Washington, D.C. The schools obviously are around the world. So we looked at the NAEP results and are delighted, and again, it's humbling in some cases. We have some gaps, we're working on those, but specifically what we've done in the last 4 years that impact, I think, on the beginning of on these NAEP results is the introduction of national standards, college and career standards throughout the system. The work began about 4 years ago, began with mathematics in the elementary, literacy. We're continuing to do that. Well, it's with fidelity. It's about a 5 to 6 year process to get all the national standards impacted. And so we're in the process of doing that. We've also aligned our instruction system, so the resources are aligned behind what we are doing in the standards. We also have focused collaboration. Our great teachers and around the world have deliberate, focused collaboration efforts, and they're overseen by our equally talented administrators. We have a robust evaluation system, and we are looking at a comprehensive assessment system as we go forward. And then finally, we reorganized for student success. We took some of the business functions, we centralized them, and we took those positions and we put them into a center of instructional leadership. We have 3 centers of instructional leadership in the regions, and this is where the professionals who are the instructional specialists can go to schools, provide coaching and professional development as our teachers work through the new standards and the implementation. So all of those impact and will continue to impact as we go forward. So I thank you for the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about Department of Defense schools and what we're trying to do to improve our educational process for our kids. Thank you.
Glenn, I know California probably has one of the more interesting recent changes to funding systems and local control. Hopefully you'll touch on that in your remarks, but tell us how California uses the Nape data.
All right. Well, it's one of my favorite topics, Terry, so I'll get into it. But thank you so much for having me here today, and I wanted to convey greetings from my boss, State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlington, had hoped to be here today, but unfortunately couldn't due to urgent business in California. But he also asked me to express his deep appreciation to the Nape Governing Board for the invitation. And as I was gathering my thoughts for today's event, I also came to mind the words of our state board president, Mike Kurse, when he talks about approaching this work, and he says we should always approach it with patience, persistence, and humility. And the word humility came to mind again as I saw the results for our NAEP scores across the country, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to be utilizing those in California. To understand some of the major changes that we've been undertaking in the California public education system, I'd like to introduce the rubric that we've called the California Way, kind of the framework and guiding principles that we use for our work. And the California Way rests on 5 guiding principles. The first is a core belief that educators want to excel. The second is that we can trust our educators to improve if we provide them and deploy the proper resources to do so. The third, and I'll talk about this, Terry, as I get into the local control funding formula a little bit, is the flexibility for local schools and districts, those closest to the action, closest to the problems, to be able to deploy resources in a flexible way. The fourth being engagement. How do we effectively engage our stakeholders and liberate that energy that's within our communities to effectively support public education? And the fifth is a fundamental commitment to equity and supporting that commitment to equity with a concrete investment strategy, which I'll get to in a second. So we've supported those core principles with both a funding, an accountability, and a continuous improvement framework. And the funding strategy is known as the local control funding formula. And the good news in California is that since the recession, we've been able to utilize the local control funding formula to increase funding for education by $44 billion, which is quite an accomplishment. But the real news is that on an annual basis, the local control funding formula moves $10.1 billion on an annual basis to prioritize the needs of low-income English learner and foster youth populations in our state. So really investing in that core equity strategy. And then along the way, we've also been able, fortunately, to invest about $1.25 billion in support for the Common Core state standards and the professional learning that needed to accompany that. So that's kind of the funding framework. If Dr. Kurst were here, he would describe the policy framework that's emerged from that with effective classroom instruction right in the center of a wheel. So that's right where the center of where every policy connects to as spokes is that effective classroom instruction. A central spoke connected to that effective classroom instruction is a multiple measures approach to accountability. So we've been looking at how do we look at the whole child, how do we think about a multiple measures approach to accountability. The work supporting strong standards and that work around multiple measures accountability has been made possible by the development and maintenance and ongoing cultivation and nurturing of a strong guiding coalition. And we pay a lot of attention to that in California. That includes labor, it includes management, it includes equity groups, it includes advocacy groups, it includes parents, and a broad range of stakeholders. So what we've seen to date, the results have been encouraging. We know that we have a long ways to go, but thinking about those multiple measures. High school graduation rates are way up to historical levels in California, and our gaps are closing. Suspension rates are on the way down. We've had an over 40% drop in suspension rates, and the gaps are closing. We still have disproportionate suspensions, but we're working on closing those. We've seen a 30.4% increase in eligibility for the University of California and a 53.5% increase in eligibility for our California State University system, again with the gaps closing. So what does NAEP mean in this context for California? Well, as a member of the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortia, California's NAEP results gratifyingly really corroborate what we've seen through our annual administration of the SBAC results. And what we've seen is slow and steady growth, and it's heartening to see that. Today's NAEP results show California up in 8th grade math, up in 4th grade reading, and showing one of the largest gains in the nation, if I'm not mistaken, in 8th grade reading. And the good news there is that those gains are occurring across all percentile levels. So we're looking forward to diving in to those results. We'll use them as a flashlight. We'll use them to help inform work at every level of the system. And I just want to close again with Dr. Kirst's words of patience, persistence, and humility. And to those I'm going to add, and I hope he'll let me, continuous improvement. So patience, persistence, humility, continuous improvement. And had the opportunity over the weekend with my family to see the movie Black Panther, and I was struck by the words of Black Panther's sister, Princess Shuri, who said, just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved, and that's what we're going to be working on in California.
Pam, as a chief in Kentucky, a couple of years our NAEP scores went up, and I'd get a call from other chiefs whose scores had gone down and want to know, well, what are you guys doing state policy-wise that we might want to consider? Even one year got a call from the Secretary of Ed congratulating us on improvement. The years they went down, I was calling folks like you. So what are you going to tell the chiefs when they call? What's the state policy issues that you're doing in Florida that you could highlight for us?
Thank you, Terry. It's an honor to be here. I, like Jillian, when I was invited, was thrilled and hoped that that indicated some good news for us with regard to NAEP. I want to thank the NAEP Governing Board also for allowing us to be here and talk about some of the great work that's happening in Florida. We are what we'd like to think is a very unique state. We are the third largest state in the nation. We have roughly 2.87 billion students, about 190,000 teachers, and yet we only have 67 school districts. So in some ways, that makes the work a little more manageable. And I think that there are many factors that go into our improvement in Florida. Certainly, it is not by happenstance. This is very focused work. It is hard work, and it is not for the faint of heart. We adopted more rigorous standards, and this group of NAEP fourth graders is the group that have only been taught those more rigorous standards from the time they entered kindergarten all the way through fourth grade. The eighth graders had these more rigorous standards in a phase-in approach, but in their entire middle school experience, they had the more rigorous college and career-ready standards. That process was an arduous process that we went through, and we took input from stakeholders, thousands of input across our state, and then we aligned assessments to those standards and have more rigorous assessments able to better measure how our students are performing and see where we needed to make improvements. So those fourth grade students had only ever taken the more rigorous assessments. Florida has long had an accountability system that has helped us, as Glenn mentioned, have continuous improvement, and we have seen that happen in Florida through our accountability system. And that is the system that we put in place so that the adults in the system can see where we are and where we are going, where the weaknesses are, where our strengths are, and what we can do to improve. Our accountability system includes not only the performance on our assessments, but also the growth, and focusing the growth of the lowest 25% of our students, no matter their subgroup. If they're performing in the bottom 25% in a school, then that is included in the school grade as to whether or not those students make learning gains. We also include our graduation rate and acceleration. So we have seen a higher percent of students performing or participating in advancement, such as AP, and performing better on those assessments. So our accountability system has certainly contributed. Like many of my colleagues have mentioned, teacher quality is certainly one of the factors that impacts how our students will perform. We know that that is the most important factor in the classroom as to how our students will improve. And so we have focused our efforts there as well. Our certification exams that our teachers take in order to become certified have become more rigorous over time, and measuring the teacher's ability to understand content and then to convey that content. Also, how the students improve is included in the teacher's evaluation as a component. And then in addition to that, we have a tiered system of support for our schools as to how they are performing. So every school system in the state receives some support from the state level, and it is tiered depending on how that district is performing and the areas where they are needing specific support. So those are the main factors that I think have impacted how Florida has been performing over the years. Thank you very much. Terry?
All right, 30 seconds each on this question, and then we want to make sure we have time for the audience to participate. I know all of you are very active in the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I know that you've been very engaged in that organization in closing achievement gaps. You have a huge equity agenda, and you've recently advertised for a Chief Equity Officer. All right, how do you then move equity? What are the two things that you're really going to push as state chief to close achievement gaps, which then in turn would help this nation close the achievement gaps? Because we've been working on this for quite some time, and as the data show, we are not getting there. Let's start with Tom. Two things you're going to do as state chief, 30 seconds. to close
30
achievement
seconds.
gaps.
We're implementing a Department of Defense evaluation system, and it's data-driven. It'll be remarkably detailed, and it will allow driven into classrooms so that teachers and administrators will be able to identify by student where they are and what plan, what can we bring to bear, what additional resources, additional outside interventions we can bring to ensure that we narrow that gap. We're blessed. We do not. We have done good work in the past to narrow that gap, but we still need work to do. So we'll primarily look to that.
Glenn?
Well, one, thanks, Jerry. I just want to applaud the work of the Council of Chief State School Officers in really keeping this vision in front of the nation, and we'll certainly be supporting it all the way in California. The three things that come to mind immediately, Terry, in response to your question are: one is just continue to not forget that an investment strategy needs to back up the call for equity. We need to be thinking about equity not as a slogan, not as a form of rhetoric, but how are we actually backing that up with investment? And we'll be continuing to figure out how we can do that and increase the levels of investment in California. And secondly, we'll be continuing to work on the development of our system of support. We're also working on a tiered system of support, kind of following from the groundbreaking research and work that's been done around multi-tiered systems of support, reflecting that at a state level where we have support that's provided for all, then for a few, and then for a very few, and really making sure that as we do that, that we're serving each and every child.
Ma'am?
And we've been focused on this work on closing the achievement gap for quite some time. I've held some convenings with the school superintendents so that we can focus on this work. We are really focused on 4 different areas: chronic absenteeism of our students and what do we do to improve the attendance of our students, the discipline gap, the 9th grade retention we know is a factor, and chronic absenteeism. And those are 4 factors over which we have control in the system. And so we've been focused on that. Also, I think that our work on the lowest 25% and focusing on that in each of our school grades has made an impact and is certainly very important. We also took the 10 tenets from CCSSO's Good Work on Equity, and we personalized that for school superintendents to be able to utilize that in their school districts as well.
Julia?
I love going last because I could just say ditto, but I'll add to that and say that one of my main responsibilities as Chief State School Officer in Wyoming and in the nation is to make sure that we think comprehensively all the time about equity. Pam brought up the 10 tenets, our equity commitments as an organization, and in Wyoming, where we don't have a lot of racial disparity, but we have a lot of equity issues with respect to poverty, disabilities, rural versus urban, and so always bringing all inequities and all equity issues to the table to make sure that it remains a comprehensive issue is important. Second of all, we have a refined accountability model that no longer just looks at students who are ready for college, but we look at students who are ready for careers and ready for military service, and I'm really excited to give that a chance to work. I think when we look at everything from our NSIs to the training that we offer to the modes of instruction that we offer in our state, just letting all of the reform efforts inside of ESSA and inside of our states work over the next few years will be telling and really prodding that along with the equity conversation.
Excellent. We have just a few minutes for a couple of questions. These guys are so good, you have no questions.
Is that thorough?
I'll give a little wait time.
Good morning, Tangi Marshall from the Education Trust. I know that you all are focusing on modes of equity, but with all the research that talks about the impact of teacher belief systems, how are y'all working with that, with your educators in the districts and throughout your state to really look at money's going to go where money's going to go, and we know where it's going to go. The question then is at the heart of what happens is what teachers believe about students, and no matter what you spend or give them, their belief's going to be an overriding and undergirding factor. So how are you addressing the belief systems as well?
Open it to the panel. Who wants to?
I'll take one stab at it because this has been something that we've been focused on. One of the works that addresses that from a more global sense is Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. But the other reading that I share everywhere I go, and I had to pull it up to read the title, is called The Impact of Implicit Bias, Racial Anxiety, and Stereotype Threat on Student Outcomes. If you haven't read it, I recommend that reading for everyone. And we are on the mission from a groundswell of doing that work with all of our teachers in the state.
I'll also just add on to that and say that stakeholder input from our teachers is probably the most valuable stakeholder input that we get. And it drives policy, but it also helps build that confidence in the system. Our state system of support, one of the biggest components in our state system of support is professional learning communities and building leaders, no matter if you're at the classroom level or the school level or the district level, sometimes even the community level. I'm a big believer in that we don't have to look out of the state for the best expertise. So utilizing peers and really creating a system and a culture of improving alongside, shoulder to shoulder with each other is really important and something that we'll continue to do. I certainly don't expect teaching to be a static field. It needs to be very dynamic, but to kind of to flood all of our reform efforts with that dynamic perspective is always important.
shameless plug as the chair of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Teachers who go through that process with the 5 core teaching principles discover their issues that they may have with bias. I believe we have one other question right back here. Just a moment.
My name's again Guy Brandenburg, and I'm a retired DC public school teacher. I forget who of you was talking about the increase in graduation rates in your state. Who was that? That's what I thought. Okay. I was wondering whether you have any inklings in your state of the sort of scandal we've had here right in DC, where huge numbers of students didn't show up to school, didn't do the work, didn't pass the classes, but through various subterfuges were passed anyway in order to increase the apparent graduation rate. And I've heard from other people that it's often happening in other cities. I know I've gone in and sat on classes after I retired, and when I was helping some other math teachers, and I would find in a first period class, which had 25 kids on the books, that maybe 5 kids would show up at some point or another during the class. They didn't stay all day, But that's my question. Has there been any sign? Actually, I had a second question too. Is there any sort of general investigation in other states into this sort of fraudulent increasing of rates of graduation?
Got time for one response. Who wants to give it?
Well, I'll give a go at it. A couple of things there. One, just to respond to the basic question is, yes, there are a number of audits that occur around how to look for any possibility of fraud, and it's something that we all just need to be very vigilant about. And it's perhaps in some ways, a feature or a result of some perverse incentives that we've been providing to school systems. And one thing that one way to kind of approach thinking about that, and we've been trying to incorporate in California, is looking at not only just the status of graduation rates or suspension rates or academic performance, but also the change and improvement, and combining that into a metric, and recognizing that the actual action is in the improvement, and thereby try to take away some of the incentive for perhaps falsifying data on a purely static measure of performance.
NAEP is the gold standard. It's so critical for, we have one more you want me to go over. Robert gave me permission to go over. All right.
Thanks, Jillian Luckner. Thanks for going over a second. My question is, given that we're seeing some of the higher performing students improve and some of the lower performing students decline, and the information on the opportunity gap, which is showing that oftentimes high-income families are paying 7 times as much as low-income families on opportunities for their children, is there anything you're doing with connecting with out-of-school time factors or experiences that you think is helping students in their educational progress? Thanks.
Take a shot at that. But just going back to California experience, we've yes, and I would refer those here in the room and the audience to expandedlearningcalifornia.org and to take a look at some of those programs. But we've been taking full advantage of the opportunities afforded by Title IV and the 21st Century Community Learning Center program. And thank you to everyone who has advocated to maintain funding for those programs. And then we've complemented that in California with our own Proposition 49, which provides about $500 million a year for after-school programs in the state. But the trick, and what we're still learning about in California, is how do you bring together after school, out of school time, and out of school time factors with the K-12 day and do that effectively.
Again, NAEP is the gold standard. The next couple of years, we will have a delightful experience of everybody having their own opinion about what this data tells us. And these guys will have the wonderful opportunity to do something with it. Please join me in thanking this excellent panel for their insight today.
One more round of applause as they exit. for that very, very meaningful and stimulating discussion. We've now hit one of my favorite topics, #equity. And I think that what we're seeing is that as the best of us continue to do better and those among us who struggle continue to struggle, that means the nation as a whole stays static. And that is not politics, it's math, and we got a chart for that. And so I applaud all of the panelists for really talking to us about their struggles in the sophisticated ways and complicated attempts to address the situation. It gives me faith that we are actually going to have the courage and the dexterity to get this done.